I don't know what the problem was. Must be the internet gremlins. I'll wait for a couple more minutes for other ones to get joined back in. What's for dinner, Ray? What's for dinner?
I go to bed very early, so I go to bed around 8. So like,
Did you say you go to bed early? So do I. But I'm up, as many of you know, I'm up at 3 or 4 in the morning usually as well. I grew up in the country, that old adage, early to bed, early to rise, and early bird gets the worm. I've been testing that my whole life. Okay, welcome back. Sorry we had a little trouble getting started. I'll start my jabbering and then I'll address your questions here in a bit. But first I want to apologize for the technical issues that we had last week. I suppose that had to do with the fact that I was in Austin and I was running off of my hotspot, which was Verizon, and it was right during rush hour. I have a feeling that the system kind of got overloaded with signal during that time. Who knows? But thanks for those of you that stuck with me to the bitter end, and my apologies for that thing dropping off on you. Welcome back to EDL 710, Leading Instruction and Assessment, the week 6 Zoom session. And the last Zoom session of the term. As I've reminded you every week, we won't have a Zoom session in week 7. You will get the final exam instead. That reminds me, the week 7 module will probably open tomorrow. It will definitely open early, so you can start pecking away on that thing at your earliest convenience. And a reminder to you that the week 7 assignments are all due on Saturday night at midnight rather than on Sunday night. I've told you all along that I was going to try to infect your thinking, and I've continued to try to do that. I believe this last week in particular, I saw a little evidence of some of your thinking being infected. The business of school is learning. Several of you have talked about that we're in the people business, and some of, if we listen to Daniel Pink, we're in the business of sales, and we have all those functions as part of our work, but our core function is learning. And that's what we have to keep. If the principal in the building cannot stay focused on learning, I promise you that the other people in the building cannot stay focused on learning. I did my doctoral work at Texas Tech University, and I had the great good fortune of studying for a year under Dr. Mike Moses, who had served in Texas as the Commissioner of Education for several years. And also he served several large school districts as school superintendent, including Dallas ISD. And Mike taught us and hammered away with us pretty frequently that you could tell what's important to people by watching 2 things. 1, how they spend their time, and 2, how they spend their money. I would like to add an addendum to that, number 3, how they spend their effort. Now, the structural pieces that we discussed in week 5, those are very much the technical components of the principal work and school leadership work. And while it's more like organizational management stuff, those are critical pieces that allow us to achieve our goals in our core business, which is learning. By the way, that reminds me, on the videos that I've been sharing with you, I've mentioned this to other classes, and I don't think I mentioned it to you all. When you open those videos up, down at the bottom of the screen, you can see a little settings gear icon. And if you want to, you can go in there, you can change the speed of those videos so that you can speed up the language in the video. You and I, most human beings, our brains, you all more so than others, but you can process words at 700 to 1,000 words a minute. Your brain can. Most speakers, unless they are well-trained and very proficient, can only speak at about 300 to 400 words per minute. So it gives your mind a lot of time to wander around and not pay attention. So if you want to speed the videos up and get them done a little quicker, and also help you stay a little more focused on them, you can turn the speed up on those things. I usually listen to them at, depending on the speaker, at 1.25 or 1.5 speed. I seem to have exposed some of you to some new stuff in week 5, and I'm glad to have learned that. I'll talk through a few of those things, and then make a couple of comments about week 7, 6, and 7, then we'll get on with your questions. The Learning Task 5.1, which had to do with the curriculum, the United Nations curriculum document overview piece. That's one of the better documents, compendium type documents I've ever found that has to do with curriculum. Some of you may have taken an ED class, a C&I class with me back in the fall maybe, or early spring, I can't remember. And so it would have been a re-exposure to those of you in the class to that document. But a couple of points on that document and that content. The curriculum should be and should be the well-considered, what do we want them to learn? It's the structural piece that guides everything about our school endeavor. April rightly noted the curriculum is best viewed as a dynamic and living document, and I wholeheartedly agree with her. And Matt and a few others of you noted the community-based focus that they talked about in that document, that it should be inherent in the curriculum. Many of you are experiencing curriculum requirements and mandates that do not seem to be community-focused whatsoever. And that's the top-down version of curriculum. You will know, and when we get to the Roscoe ISD, collegiate ISD stuff, we'll come back to it, but more and more states, and I'm not sure about countries, but certainly more and more states are moving to a community-based accountability focus, where the school accountability is not centered completely on the standardized testing and the high-stakes testing. I view that as a very good thing, because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is create good citizens, not necessarily just good test takers. And it's very hard to measure stuff like compassion and trustworthiness and responsibility. We don't have good metrics for those yet. I think as time goes by, we'll see more and better attempts at devising metrics for some of those soft skills, or what we typically call socio-emotional learning. But on the topic of curriculum, Dr. Robert Marzano has become quite famous for his work in that regard, and his NCREL team there from Nebraska. But Dr. Marzano posits that it's critical that we have a guaranteed and viable curriculum which serves as the foundation of our work. What do we want our children to learn? Or in the case of you all, what do I want you to learn? I hope it's becoming more evident to you as weeks go by. I know what my intentions are. Let's skip over to Learning Test 5.2, the Seth Godin and Dan Brown videos. Those were both somewhat abstract pontifications, but I wanted you to think of those, their thoughts in relation and in the context of what are schools for and what do we want them to learn? What do we want the children, what do we want the students to learn? There's important implications for us, even though their arguments were somewhat abstract. There's important implications for the structural pieces that you and I put in place to cause that learning to happen. Particularly at the elementary level, we will never, ever get away from the custodial component. Many parents and communities rely on the school to be the babysitters for those little pups for 170, 180 days of the year while mom and dad go to work. Mom or dad go to work, or whatever the family arrangement is. Kristen and Bridget noted the publication dates of those two videos as being, I think, about 2011, 2012, and the fact that we still seem stuck in the paradigm that both of those speakers railed against. And rightly noted, you are correct. One of the reasons I've given you those videos to look at and consider is because you are the next cadre of school leaders. If the paradigm is going to change, you are going to have to start that process. And the question is, what you going to do? From Kat, she also asked, why are we doing what we're doing and why will it matter? Absolutely. It's all about continuous improvement. And as you move into more and more responsible roles of school leaders, some of you, like Brandy and Amy and a few others, are already there. You're already experiencing those things. But as we move more into those responsibility roles, I think the concept of continuous improvement will become more meaningful to you and more important to you. On the topic of Learning Task 5.2, both Dan Brown and Seth Godin rightly suggested that maybe our focus on memorization should change, and Teresa and some others kind of zeroed in on that. It reminded me of one of the largest districts that I worked in as a high school principal. And some of you know, Brandon and a few others of you know, I charaded as a math teacher for the first part of my career. But I used to get into some interesting debates with my immediate supervisor in that large district because she consistently made the argument that Seth Godin and Dan Brown did, that we needed to completely abandon the concept of memorizing stuff. And a few of you have challenged that thought, and I accept those challenges, and I share them to a degree. The point I make with my boss in those arguments, because she argued that students should be able to use graphing calculators for all of their mathematics classes, and I'm fine with the technology. I love the technology, and actually as an algebra teacher, I found the graphing calculators to be a wonderful tool to speed that learning up, particularly when you're talking about slopes of lines and ellipses and parabolas and the way those things change in relation to the variables. But the point I made with my boss was this: if the students do not have a good, strong grasp of math facts, addition facts, multiplication facts, subtraction, division facts, and they have to go to a graphing calculator to do such simple things as divide 63 by 7, then their lack of knowing those facts is slowing their work down. On the flip side of that, for those of you that remember going through Algebra 1 when you were probably one of the 9th graders, a few of you as 8th graders, and some of the savants among you probably as 6th or 7th graders, and then a few of you like me might have taken Algebra 1 multiple times. But my point is, you did a lot of graphing of lines, and you probably did it on graph paper with a pencil and put a dot here and put a dot here and lay your ruler on there and draw there, and you find the slope intercept and all that stuff. And it was painful and laborious, whereas on and part of that process was to teach you the impact of slope, which is fairly important for the roof of your house or the grade of your highway or all kinds of components, how quickly the plane can accelerate and get lift. But we wanted, and as a math teacher, we wanted you to explore the impact of slope on lines, whether it was a negative slope or a positive slope or slope near zero or with no slope. And when you're having to do that by brute force, pencil, paper drawing every time, it becomes slow and laborious. Whereas with a graphing calculator, you can change those variables and change the constants in those equations rather quickly and quickly see what happens to the slope when it goes from 1/2 to 1/3 to 1/4 to 1/5 and so on and so forth. So my argument with my boss was it's important to be able to have in your quick fluid memory some important facts, if you will. In this case, we're talking math facts. I suggest to all of you in that regard that we not land on either end of that continuum completely. Let's not be radical on either end. You all tend to remember the things that you use often and need. And you tend not to remember the things you don't use often and need. You and I probably, most of us, had a chemistry class in high school. And we remembered how to balance the moles, or I think that's what we called it. My apologies to the science teachers. And most of us memorized a lot about the periodic table, and most of us don't remember anything about it now. But we had it for a brief time. The reason we no longer have it is we don't use it anymore. So it's not important for us to have it in quick memory. So let me move on. I beat that horse to death. By the way, it reminds me, on the issue of memorization and learning in general, if you have not looked up on Google the video about the guy learning to ride the backward bicycle, look that video up and watch it, in which he's trying to learn how to ride a bicycle in which the handlebar works opposite from the one that from the system that you and I learned on. And he talks about how quickly his child, his daughter, learned to ride that backwards mechanism handle on the bicycle much quicker than he did as an adult. A very interesting video, and it's one that you can use for professional development for those of you that are going to be doing that business. Wait a minute, I think I've mentioned that you're now the teachers of adults and not just the teachers of children. Let's move to one more thing. If you have not read in the learning task submissions on 5.2, Maria Luis's submission, I invite you to look that up and take a look at that. I loved it. It reminded me, I'm a fan of all kinds of music, and particularly some country music. And one of the lines in a favorite song of mine goes, "The road goes on forever and the party never ends." And I like to modify that ever so slightly. The road goes on forever and the learning never ends. Learning task 5.3. Absolutely, this was and is the best document I have found to date that covers the concept from A to Z of master scheduling. Brandon asked me a question about that last week, and I saw in your comments, Brandon, in your learning task that you found the answer to the A through G thing. Two primary things drive master scheduling. From a conceptual perspective: efficiency, use of time, efficient use of human resources, efficient use of money, efficient use of electricity, efficient use of buses. It's about efficiency. And then the second thing is safety. Believe it or not, it's not a good thing to leave a bunch of ninth graders unattended. It's fine with a bunch of kindergartners, but not a bunch of ninth graders. So efficiency and safety are huge components in the master scheduling, and the master scheduling is a technical piece for you and I. And many of you noted in your comments that you had no idea all the stuff the work and the stuff that underlays the master scheduling process. I'm going to visit with you a few minutes about that because it's a pretty dadgum big deal. But I was very thankful. Well, I'll get to that later. As in most cases, the most vulnerable among us have the fewest and the quietest and the least powerful advocates. So as a campus principal, if the most vulnerable among your campus do not have you as an advocate, they probably won't have one. The master scheduling allows you and I to send some very strong and powerful messages. As campus principals, you're going to be in the decision-making loop with regard to a whole lot of money. The largest campus that I served as a high school principal, and this was 14 years ago, At that time, the campus budget was over $12 million. I couldn't touch $12 million, and I couldn't manipulate all 12 million of those dollars because most of them were tied up in buses and teacher salaries and stuff that I did not have the power to change. I could only manipulate about $250,000 out of that 12 million. I had far more ability to send strong messages about what was important through the building of the master schedule than I ever did through the manipulation of the school budget. You and I can send some very powerful messages through the way, not only the way we build the master schedule, but what we establish as the priorities for the building of the master schedule. And I want to talk to you just a few minutes about the technical components, some technical components of that. And I'm glad, I was very glad to see that that was brand new learning for so many of you. Master schedules, school schedules come in all kinds of varieties, and I've worked in most of them: 6-period days, 7-period days, 8-period days, accelerated, block schedules, modified block, hybrid schedules, floating periods. I've worked in a school one time where on Monday, first period was at the first period of the day, and on Tuesday it moved to the second period of the day, and on Wednesday it went to the third period of the day. It was pretty confusing for everyone, believe it or not. But the concept of a scheduling team seemed foreign to most of you. And I hate that, but it's the fact of life. But as a campus principal and as a school leader, I strongly recommend that when you become the person that's responsible for a campus, that you do establish a scheduling team. And it doesn't matter if it's an elementary campus or a middle school campus or a high school campus. To be sure, to be certain, the complexity of the schedule is dependent on the volume of the students that you have and the variety, the breadth of offerings that you have to offer. So, for instance, if you work on a primary grade campus that's only serving, let's say, some schools only have, it's like second and third grade are the only 2 grade levels on a campus. But even some of those are large. They have a lot of students. They might have 500 or 600 students, but the fewer number of grades, the less complex the schedule, because it's much more monogamous of the offerings that you have. And the lower the grade levels, you have far fewer electives. You almost always have music and PE and art as part of the schedule. And some very progressive groups schools will do some interesting other things. But typically in the elementary, particularly the primary grades, it's very core academic focused with a few specials. We call them specials. Those schedules are a little easier to build than the ones, for instance, in a large comprehensive high school, because you have such a large breadth of course offerings and electives and multiple grade levels. Most high schools serve 9th through 12th graders. So you got this range of students, and typically, particularly in the large high schools, some of them even balloon up to 5,000 to 6,000 students. And those are monsters. Jiminy Christmas, those are monsters. But even if you're going to use if you're in a small school, and I was a pre-K through 12 principal for 150 students. That was my initial principalship. I built the master schedule. It was very difficult in its own sense because the smaller the school, the more unicorns you have on the campus. For instance, the music teacher may also be the technology director for the campus. And so it requires some fancy footwork of trying to make those puzzle pieces fit together. Another thing is on elementary campuses, I mentioned the specials to you earlier. Frequently, often on elementary campuses, the specials teachers are shared between campuses. So you might love to have music scheduled in the morning, but you're sharing the music teacher with another elementary school 10 blocks away, and that teacher is theirs in the morning and yours in the afternoon. That has pretty huge implications for the way you get to build your schedule. And the same thing goes often with PE teachers and technology teachers, any of those elective kinds of non-academic, core academic offerings. So those are the kinds of complexities that you get, that trouble puzzle, befuddle the scheduling team. I recommend, though, that you always use a scheduling team. It's just such a complex endeavor that it needs multiple bright minds on it. And the larger the campus, the more you need it. And almost always, I know principals that want to do all the master scheduling on their own. I think it's a mistake that some of them do it. I know principals that don't want any part of it, and they get a scheduling team and they keep their hands completely out of it. I believe that's a mistake as well, because at the end of the day, whenever that schedule comes out, the person that has to defend it is the principal. And again, it's a way for you and I to send some very powerful messages about what we think is important. Who gets to see the schedule? So the document, the Cal Berkeley document, gave you a very nice education on the timelines and the way that process unfolds. Most of you rightly noted that is from the large school perspective. The smaller the school, you can shorten those timelines quite a bit. In the particularly large schools, you have to start getting student requests in by early February. Those choice sheets go out in January, right after you come back from the winter break. And then I believe it's always important to have the lead counselor. Some of you I know only have one counselor, and we've got a couple of counselors in this class, in fact. But it's important to have the lead counselor on the scheduling team. Now, that person has inside information, if you will, to use Wall Street terminology, about which students need what. It's very important stuff. I believe it's always important to have, if you're on a larger campus, to have 2 or 3 either grade level lead teachers or department chairs, if you're in middle schools or high schools, on that team. And I also believe it's always nice to have a numbers geek, a data freak on the team, someone that can run spreadsheets and understand numbers and punch and change variables and quickly see how a change in this number impacts the whole picture. When I was a principal of large campuses, I did not personally put my hands on the nuts and bolts of the schedule. I got a scheduling team of 5, sometimes 6 people, and I gave them some very important parameters. And I want to speak to you about the concept of constraints right now. I mentioned to you at the outset that scheduling is really about efficiency, the efficient use of resources, plus safety. The most efficient use of resources would be completely blind to any special considerations. It would be all about plugging the same number of people in to the same number of seats into the same number of classrooms for the same number of periods for the same number of days. There are special needs on the campus. For instance, some campuses have 1 gymnasium, some campuses have 2 gymnasiums, some campuses even have 3 gymnasiums. Makes it a lot easier to schedule PE classes if you have multiple gymnasiums. But if you only have 1 gymnasium, then you pretty much are going to have to schedule PE classes during first period and then second period and then third period and then fourth period to scatter those little PE pups and the PE teachers across the day into that 1 gymnasium. That's called a constraint. That's a constraint on the schedule because it's a variable in there that impacts the way you can staff. Another one, lunches, depending on how large your campus is and how large your lunchroom is. I've worked on campuses in which we had 3 lunches, each of them with 800 students. Yeah, that was a monster. Some of you work on elementary campuses where you can get by with one lunch, and the lunchroom is big enough for everybody to be in lunch at the same time. Wonderful. But that has an implication for the way that master schedule gets built. You need multiple minds looking at those things. I have worked with middle school campuses that were serving 6th and 7th and 8th graders, and they wanted to have the same length of instructional periods every day, but they weren't at all interested in having all the 6th and 7th and 8th graders in the hallway at the same time, which I think is good thinking. So what they did is they would modify the schedule somewhat to have their 6th graders in passing period at a slightly different time than the 7th graders were in passing period, at a slightly different time than the 8th graders were in passing period. Very worthy, but challenging for the schedule team to make those kinds of scheduling adjustments, because it is a constraint. It abandons the purest efficiency model. So you've got those kinds of constraints. You've got, and as a campus principal, I have a feeling you're going to want to meet with your leadership team regularly, and I'd strongly advise you to figure out a way to do that during the workday and not ask them to show up at 6:30 in the morning or at 5:30 in the evening. Save yourself the trouble and the frustration, and also be a hero. That means then that you'll need to build a schedule in which your first grade team leader, second grade team leader, third grade team leader, fourth grade team leader, fifth grade team leader all have the same planning period. When you dub those, when you flag those 5 people, let's call it 6 period, and you say they're not going to be teaching students 6 period, what you've done is you've shrunk the efficiency of the schedule. You've made it less efficient, because you can't just freely schedule students with whatever teachers are happen to available and make sure you got 22 in each chair, in each classroom. That's a scheduling constraint. So anytime we impose our will, our preferences onto that schedule, those are called constraints, and they decrease the scheduling efficiency. Now, I've already mentioned the lunches, and then if you're a wise person and you're paying attention to the data and you're looking and you're trying to decide, okay, where are our bleeding arteries? And let's say, for instance, you decide that 7th grade math is a problem, and you've done your research. You know what the research says, and that the highest and the most effective learning occurs in the morning hours, and you go, voila, I'm going to put all 7th grade math in first, second, and third period. Go for it. Good. But understand, you have shrunk the efficiency of the schedule. You've tightened it up to where it's not as efficient for the whole picture when you do that. That's a constraint that you imposed on it. Ray, I loved reading her comment, that she analogized the master scheduling stuff that she was learning in that content to having a Jenga puzzle. And I've often referenced it as a million-piece a million-piece puzzle. And quite often the principal and the scheduling team don't have all the pieces on the table. They don't even know where some of them are. But Tito nailed it in his comments. He nailed it rightly and well. It's an issue of time management, but it goes beyond that. It goes also to resource management. So that's the management side of the work you and I do. It's fun just to be leaders, but there's got to be some management that goes with it. Just for your information, I need to get off this and move on to something else. On the particularly large campuses, when the scheduling team was working, by the way, I want to make a comment for Jade's benefit here too, because she pinged this. I sent very strong messages early on with the scheduling team, because I always tell the scheduling team, as common practice is we call them singletons. The class offering that was only going to happen once in the schedule. Like in a high school, it was going to be something like BC calculus or advanced placement three-dimensional art or something like that. It was a class that was only going to happen one time, and there was only going to be 10, 15 students in that class, but man, they were crackerjacks. Singletons go on the schedule first. The facilities issues, depending on how many lunches or gymnasiums you have, band halls, those kinds of things, dance studios, those things force those things onto the schedule first. Then there was the doubletons. Those were the classes that were only going to happen twice in the day. Then those went on the schedule. And I always told the scheduling team I wanted, among the first 5 things that they put on the master schedule that went on that board on that wall, I wanted the inclusion classes for the special ed students to be put on there among the first 5. I stipulated that was in the first 5 priorities. And here's why. We knew who the most effective inclusion teachers were. Most people build a master schedule ass backwards from that, and they start trying to figure out how to handle the inclusion kids after everything else goes on the board. But I felt like their learning needs trumped the learning needs of the other 90% of the students in the building. And so we would hand schedule those students on the front end, and then let the computers, if you're in a large campus, someone asked about if there are softwares, and yes, there are a number of proprietary softwares that help you make those scheduling runs, which they occur, you do them every week after you tweak the schedule, and that usually begins in mid-April on the largest campuses, early to mid-April. So what you're looking for is efficiency. Once you start letting those computer algorithms run and you look for those course conflicts and that conflict matrix, you're trying to find out how many English 3 students can you not get in the schedule based on the number of classes you're trying to offer. And that tells you if you need to open another section of English 3, or if you're overloaded with English 3 students in first period, and you only have a handful of them in fourth period, then you make some scheduling adjustments to see if you can get the English 3 students balanced across the schedule. And that's all that technical stuff. Here's my point. At some point in the summer, the scheduling team is going to come to you and they're going to say, oh, we're at 75%. And that means we've got 75% of the students in the classes that they need and that they want, that they wanted to be in with their choice sheets. And so you say, try some more, tweak some more. And they'll come to you a few weeks later and they'll say, okay, we're at about 80%. And you'll say, keep working. At the point that they come into you and they say we're at 85 or 90%, that's when you say, stop. Put a fork in it. That is our master schedule. Then the counseling team has to get in contact with that 10% of the students that didn't get their first priority elective. And some of you've been there before. I understand that. Let me make one more comment about scheduling. I want to go on to the Roscoe thing. I mentioned to you that I studied under Dr. Mike Moses. And one of the things that Mike used to teach us as well, he said, when you're working on master schedule, here's one of the things, you're going to lose a few friends, but you'll never lose any enemies. And those of you that have worked on schedule teams, you can understand that. You're never going to build a master schedule that makes everybody happy. I have actually, truthfully, had people come to me on the stakeholder input thing. I've had employees ask me if they could have the last period of the day conference because they had a standing hair appointment. I did not see that as a compelling student need, and so obviously I did not grant that request. But you're going to get all those kinds of requests. And on the topic, that content document shared this, that it's important. Typically what we did was send an invitation to all the people in the building. And usually it was in early February, and said, if you have a recommendation or a specific request that you would like for us to consider as we build the master schedule, please send that to us in an email, and it needs to be here by February the 15th. And we kept all those special requests in a binder. We read them all. And we considered them all, and we balanced them against the needs of the students and the needs of the whole. Some of them were worthy and quite thoughtful requests, and some of them were as flippant as the one I mentioned to you about the standing hair appointment. Let's move on to the Roscoe collegiate model. I wanted you to look at that, and I was a bit surprised that so many of you had not ever looked at a district improvement plan before. So you're welcome. I wanted you to look at Roscoe's work, and I have been working personally with Roscoe on their advisory council for the last, 5 or 6 years. And I've known Dr. Alexander for over 30 years. If you think I'm country, you should listen to that guy talk. But he's one of the smartest and most visionary leaders I have ever known and worked around. And he had a vision, and he was raised in that community, went home after college, taught, and he coached athletics, and then he became a principal in that community. He has never worked anywhere other than Roscoe. He's not trying to polish his resume. He is trying to serve a little school district in rural Texas that is loaded up with low socioeconomic kids and trying to create the best and most powerful futures that he possibly can for them. And he's done, he's known across the nation for the work that they're doing there. A few things, but I wanted you to see the structural pieces in that district improvement plan that he and those progressive people in that little conservative rural community have put in place to ensure high quality futures for their children. As you noted, most of you noted, it's an early college model. Not the early college concept been around for 15 years, but their early college model is not just for a select subset of students in that district. It is for every child in that district. Their goal, as you saw, they want every one of their high school seniors to graduate with 60 hours, and it's all free. It's at no charge. Those college hours are at no charge to the parents. But they want every one of their seniors to graduate with an associate's degree. So if they want to move on to four-year university, they can. Or those 60 hours of associate degrees are almost always industry related or have an employability component certification that goes with them, so that they can immediately step out of high school / community college and step into a decent paying job. It was not last year, but I think year before last, they graduated 29 students, and 28 of the 29 received an associate degree 2 days before they received their high school diploma. It's just remarkable, absolutely remarkable. You saw that they're employing the Montessori concept in the early childhood, and they're expanding that upward. They have been using Avid, Tito. Tito is our resident Avid teacher, but they've been using Avid. I'd always experienced Avid at the high school level. I'd seen a few middle schools do it, but Roscoe applies Avid pre-K through 12. Not many people do that. They are focused on, as you could see, on social emotional learning. They're trying to raise good citizens and not just good academicians. And you also saw, I think, that they use Harvard instructional rounds. Twice a year, they invite people, teachers like yourselves, from all over Texas and other states to come in and do instructional rounds, Harvard instructional rounds. It's one day in October and one day in April. They use flex scheduling because they have so many high school students beginning, most of them their sophomore year, a few of them in their freshman year, taking college courses even that early, because they need to in order to get 60 hours of credit. That means that they're working in partnership with their community college, actually more than one community college, but they have one that serves them closely. But those classes are taught like this class is, most of them, in an online format, so that requires some flexible scheduling for those students. If they're taking, for instance, for their junior year, instead of taking English 3, if they're taking English Composition 1, university level, then and their teacher is 60 miles down the road, then they have to make accommodations for that, and they do. They become very student-oriented, learner-oriented in their scheduling. And finally, the structural pieces, and I forgot which one of you noted this. They have become very entrepreneurial. Roscoe happens to sit in the largest wind turbine farm on the planet. It's a huge wind electricity industry complex around them. So they are teaching students that are interested in it to be certified drone drivers to inspect those big wind turbines. And they've created basically a for-profit wing of their school to generate money to help them propel that thing. They have created their own veterinary clinic, because it's an ag-based community. They have a resident veterinarian that also teaches students vet tech classes. But when people bring their dogs and cats and cattle and to them, they charge those people a fee, just like any other veterinarian would, that it helps support the programming. So it's become a very cool partnership within their community, but it's also had an entrepreneurial focus. They are now working on partnerships with four-year universities. Texas A&M is the case in point, and they're trying to grease the skids for their students to move right from that high school to that associate's degree right into a four-year degree with Texas A&M University. And I think he's going to be able to pull that off. Brandon Knight rightly noted the import of making a review and the discussion of the DIP a regular feature of your leadership team meeting every month, or as frequently as your leadership team meets. Most people do a district improvement plan, put it in a 3-ring binder, put it on a shelf in the principal's office, and don't look at it until next summer. I believe that high-quality district improvement plans that are well-constructed and you have the input of the stakeholders and the best interest of the students as a whole are working, living documents, and they should be the focal point of your meetings with your leadership team and your PTA and your school board, if that's the case. I got to quit talking. We're running out of time, dadgum. Here we go. Week 6 is on assessment of and for learning. Some more technical pieces, but it's kind of interesting stuff. And then week 7, we'll move into collaborative and evaluative practices. I hate that I don't get the opportunity to visit with you face-to-face in that regard, but a couple of books that came to mind while I was looking through your stuff is one called Negotiating the Curriculum. It's kind of old, but it's really a very good book. Negotiating the Curriculum, Education for the 21st Century, which we're now about 1/5 the way into, by Boomer and others. And then another one, School Culture Rewired, by Grunert and Whitaker. Copyright date 2015. School Culture Rewired. They address some of the technical pieces of school leadership, like these structural things that we've been talking about. Let me jump over to the chat box because I'm running out of time, and if some of you got to jump out, I apologize. It's okay if you got to quit at 7 o'clock. I promise not to run too long. Let me get back up here and see what happens. I'm looking for questions. I'll skip your comments. I'm looking for question marks. Thought I saw one earlier. Did I? Oh, that was about the signal. Dr. Nelson Ray asked, do you have any tips and tricks when making it? Well, yeah, I've been covering some of those. And I would, by the way,
that was, yeah.
The team, we would officially, they would officially, once the choice sheets were in around the 1st of April, then that team began meeting in concert. And I would meet with them personally about once a week so that they could ask me questions. Now, there's 2 important things there. One, you're providing them the parameters, like I mentioned, like I wanted the inclusion student schedule first. Everybody on that scheduling team is being subjected to severe political pressure. They're all serving constituents, just like you are. So if it's the math department chair, he or she is getting a ton of pressure from the math department teachers for special consideration in that schedule. You got to be aware of that. You will never remove politics from the master scheduling process, but the principal can provide direction for that thing. And for instance, if I were to say, I want, if we were having that math problem I was mentioning earlier, if I said, I want the 7th grade math scheduled in the first 3 hours of the day, that's guidance for that team. Then someone's going to bitch and complain about that decision. You can be sure of it. You can be sure of it. And so the principal then has to provide cover for that team. Don't throw them under the bus. If you're the person that provided the guidance, then you tell that team when you meet with them every week, if someone has a complaint, send them to me. Don't let the team be the ones that have to suffer under that continual buffeting of the political pressure. You take that off of them as much as you can. Let me move down and see if I can find another question before I let you all go back to your rat killing. Counselors are critical to that thing. I know principals that just turn it over to the counselor. I think it's a huge mistake, and they shouldn't have to bear that burden alone. Should not have to. I'm looking for questions here. A few of you, interestingly, I noted have already had some experience working on scheduling teams. And if you're interns, not quite a few of you are working on your internship stuff. The summertime is a great time to invite yourself into that process. It might change your mind about being a school leader. But so Teresa asked, maybe off topic, but is the collegiate ISD a newer thing in Texas? Teresa, the early college model has been here for 12 or 15 years, but it started out mostly in very large districts like Houston and Dallas and El Paso, and they would rent an abandoned shopping center, and they would take lottery applications from so many, let's say 150 students out of these huge districts, and they would try to launch that model, and often it was aimed at lower socioeconomic students. But the early college model like Roscoe's doing right now, there's only 3 small school districts in Texas that have adopted that model completely. Interestingly, the state legislature in West Virginia has become familiar with what Roscoe's doing, and they're trying to apply that at a statewide level in some of their rural schools. But we're seeing more and more of it, and it's very contagious, but it takes very bold, visionary leaders and school boards to be able to say, we want something better for our children than what the traditional rural school has provided for them. And because of the tools that you and I are using tonight, the world is our oyster. There is no reason. There was a time that if you wanted only the highest quality education, you had to be not only in a metropolitan area, you had to be in a metropolitan area that was highly affluent and highly educated. No more. No more. Anywhere on the planet, you can get the kind of education that you want. Let me see. Jennifer Cook, can we expect Module 7 in the final to be active this week? Jennifer, that'll be, I'll activate that either tomorrow at the latest Friday. My plan is to turn that baby on tomorrow morning. I've got everything in the queue, and I'll probably about 4:30 in the morning, I'll get it all loaded up and hit the send button. Okay, I apologize for the technical difficulty at the beginning of this evening, and I also apologize for running 4 or 5 minutes late. I've said this before, but I am just so thankful that you allow me to be part of your learning journey. And I hope some of you and I will get the chance to do it some more. There are a few of you are getting ready to graduate. More power to you. But even after you graduate, my invitation to you is use me as you need me. My shelf life is shrinking rather quickly. I'm a pretty old fart now, but I have a little bit of usefulness left in me, and I'm going to try to use what years I do have left to help people that are going to impact thousands of students that I'll never, ever lay my eyes on. Good night. Have a good evening.